Along the way, his mother, Gertrude, decides to call, and the king, Claudius, his uncle, decide to call a couple of his old buddies into town to glean what afflicts him, to find out what's wrong with him, to be spies. So that's what you just read. Hopefully that was somewhat clear, at least by the end, when it gets a little more direct. And I'm just going to show you a scene really quickly with the Shakespeare text, which should hopefully be much more comprehensible, having just done the reading of the paraphrase version. This is from, gosh, at least 20 years ago, and thank you, teaching assistant. This is the exact Shakespeare scene, but actually taken from the Tom Stoppard film Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and it stars very young Gary Oldman, who you may know from the Harry Potter series, and a very young Tim Roth, who you may know from the TV show Who Lied to Me. And forgive me, it is in two separate clips because of how it downloaded. Lights, please.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Good stuff. So, first of all, having read the paraphrased version of the scene and now having watched one interpretation of it, did it surprise you what you just watched, or did it seem pretty much like what you had read, or just generally give me some feedback on what you just saw and how it relates to your sort of initial instinctive interpretation of what you originally read?
Well, the acting, like their body motion, moving around, the framework, the cinematography, that sort of thing, kind of matched up with the words. I would halfway through, I was like, and what are you saying?
Right, yeah. It's hard to understand. I understand. Was there any point at which you were able to kind of get back
I
in?
started like the lady's leg around the waist, like that matched up. And I was
Right,
like,
right.
that's
There
where
you
we
go,
are.
right. Well, that's why Shakespeare puts that stuff in there. It does make us.
They made
go
it
ahead.
less dramatic. Really,
How do
when
you
we read
mean?
it, it was very more dramatic and kind of like, really, did he just say that? And there, it's like a normal conversation. It's not as, it doesn't have the depressing moments.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. Can you tell me when you use the word dramatic? Can you tell me more what you mean?
It seems more they could have put more expression in their voice. It seemed very close to monotone between all the characters.
Interesting. Yeah. Other responses to it?
I kind of think the same thing right there. They've got that like English, like the English don't like to raise their voice. Like
Right,
that whole
right.
thing is they like, even if they're like incredibly angry at somebody, they're like very tone.
You're right. It's that I will tell you why.
Yeah.
Smash the chandelier, like. Yeah, you're right. And they do, they underplay it, and I think there's supposed to be tension bubbling
Yeah.
underneath. I think also they're going for naturalism because it's film, and sometimes with Shakespeare that's tricky. I think they pull it off, but I know what you guys mean. So, what do you guys think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are doing there? I realize your knowledge of the play is limited to my 2-minute version, but just keeping in mind, we have a young man who's acting in ways that other people cannot understand. They're trying to figure it out. His parents, or his uncle and his mother. And they've called these friends, right? And they've asked them, just hang out with him, see what's going on with him, and then report back to us. And then what happens is what we just saw. So, bearing that in mind, which is really all you need to know to talk about how to interpret Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's role in the narrative of Hamlet. Bearing that in mind, what are some possibilities as far as who are these guys? Where might they be coming from? I mean, figuratively, not literally.
They're just trying to get something out of him that his parents aren't able to.
Totally. Yes. And do you think they want to be doing that?
No.
Maybe
They're
if
worried.
they-
If they're worried, they may want
They're
to.
worried as friends, but they're not trying to.
Put pressure.
Okay, hold on, one at a time, because this is perfect. I'm so glad that I just heard 4 different answers, because that's perfect. That's exactly what yes. So one at a time. Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Well, it seems like they may be a little bit worried about him, and if they were worried about him, they would want to know if he was having issues or stuff like that.
Right. So you're saying even though they were sent for, it doesn't mean they're not
Worried or
That's
concerned.
his
Yeah.
Totally. Britton?
I was just about to say the parents might be paying him.
Right.
I don't know.
So maybe they don't care at all. They're getting paid money to be there. You know? They're just getting through it and hoping to report back, which is equally valid. Molly, what were you going to say?
I think Diane should go first, and then I'll bring up a weird analogy.
Ooh,
Oh.
I love weird analogies. Okay.
I was
Yes,
agreeing
Diane.
with Tess. But also, it seems very reverse psychology scheme going on from the king and queen.
Hmm.
Because they sent his friends going, oh, act like nothing's going on, see what's really going on in his head, which is how reverse psychology works. Because you play it off as, oh, it's nothing, when it really is.
So, right. And that brings up a whole issue of how clever are they? Clearly, in this interpretation, not very, right?
No,
but from what you're saying, potentially quite clever, and that would lead to a totally different scene than the one we just watched, and equally valid idea.
Yeah, because if it would have been like, oh, actually Cytherea actually cared, it would have been, oh, we're sorry, we knew you guys were close, yada yada yada. But this, they're like, they played it off for like it was some joke. Like,
Mhm.
oh, it's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't really understand like, the mind vision. Like,
Uh-huh.
how to get out.
Right. Right. I can understand how that would be confusing. So, if we, okay, well, let's start with Tess's interpretation.
Oh, I thought that was.
Oh, I'm sorry, Molly. Molly,
Okay.
go ahead.
Really weird life analogy, because, you know, that's how Shakespeare works. Is you're kind of like, yeah, I see that in life sometimes. But this is a girl analogy. Okay, you've got one
I'll try
girl.
to follow.
Okay,
Yeah.
one girl who likes this guy.
All right.
You've got another girl who's friends with the girl, and like sort of friends with the guy, but not like close buddies with the guy.
Okay.
And the girl's like, hey, go see if this guy likes me. Go like talk it up.
Okay.
Pretend like everything's cool, natural, and you're just still buds, but kind of bring it up.
Right,
See
right.
what happens. So that's kind of what that made me think of.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And guys would never do anything like that. You're right. Total girl thing. Total girl thing. So keeping that in mind and sort of unpacking that analogy a little further, how would that relate to how you might interpret the scene if you were the director or just writing a paper about it or whatever?
Well, it's kind of like the uncle and mom weird situation right there. It is like the first girl where the communication is kind of blocked between them,
Mhm.
and they've got to have the third person kind of go in and like not really like state their intention, but everybody kind of knows what's going on, and sort of something like that.
Yeah. So, and what's neat about thinking of the scene from that angle, and by the way, some of this can be what we like to call in drama, yes and, in that it's not necessarily the case that only one of these interpretations could go. What you just said could be a way of approaching it, and also we know that they like Hamlet and are worried about it. So just to be clear about that, these aren't necessarily contradictory ideas that we're throwing out there. So I love that analogy. I think that's a great way of looking at it. One thing I want to pose to you guys and ask if it changes your interpretations at all is, going off your analogy, why wouldn't they just say, hey man, we're in private here. They told us to come. They're worried about you. Like, what should we do? To me, that's one of the most fascinating things about this scene, that they don't do that. So just kind of bearing that in mind, does that change or in any way adjust your pick?
It could affect how, like, if you didn't tell them, it could have, like, you could hint at it and find out information. But if you said, oh, this is what we're here for,
Right.
they could close themselves off, or they could explode and just go, "Rah."
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe it would change the response of Hamlet. He
Uh-huh.
would have gone, oh, maybe I shouldn't say. Or he would tell them.
Uh-huh.
It depends.
Uh-huh.
So, if they had told him, hey, I'm here because your mom and dad sent me and they're worried about you, he could have been cool about it, or he could have been not gonna tell you.
Right. Right. And in all of these cases, we end up with not just different scenes, but actually a slightly different story, really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the narrative of this great classic Hamlet actually changes to some extent based on these seemingly tiny choices. Do they actually like Hamlet? Are they actually worried about Hamlet? Are they really into this whole let's find it out secretly girl thing that I could never relate to? What's that? Sorry, go ahead.
That's the way it kind of seems at the beginning.
Yeah. Right. So, and as you just articulated so well, Tess, what that choice does will change how Hamlet reacts. And how Hamlet reacts does what? Anyone?
Changes the story.
Yes, and that's why.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It would make it somebody. It would make it seem like somebody else wrote it. It wouldn't be Shakespeare because he always has some dramatic twists.
Right.
All of his stories or plays.
Right.
There's
right.
it goes pretty normal and there's a dramatic twist
Right. Right.
to every story, and
Right.
it always has very dramatic and sad ending.
Right. So, and this is moving into a level of, if we were in a drama class and you guys were drama students, you may not really know what I'm talking about. but that's taking it to a really interesting level as far as directorial choices. If you were directing it, and that's what you love most about Shakespeare, you would probably look at this scene, you would think about these different interpretations and many others that we haven't discussed, and you would say, which of these things will help me build the suspense most, so that when we get to that moment where everything changes and there's a twist, it'll have the highest impact, which for you as a director, or even just as a student of Shakespeare, might be what matters most about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. To someone else, it might be essential that the audience really doesn't like Hamlet, for example. Maybe they want to do a production where the audience just thinks he's a complete jerk. And if they wanted to do that, what are some interpretations they might make with regard to these seemingly small characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Any ideas?
Well, they can make him a lot more angrier.
Mhm.
The fact that his friends are seemingly coming, like, in that scene, he cut down the chandelier for what seemed just like by the whole English posh tone, everybody's voice just kind of came out of nowhere, and you were like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
They could.
Sorry, you were saying something? To remind me how to pronounce your name, I'm really sorry.
Bianca.
Bianca, you were saying something?
I was just saying, like, I don't know, I mean, his tone is just getting higher.
Yeah. You didn't get any interpretation from this, is what you're saying. And that's totally valid to point out, totally. Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
They could have picked different people to play it, and yes, Shakespeare did a lot of English, used a lot of English actors, but you could have played it with different people and made it seem as, like what Molly was saying, angrier and realistic.
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, I watch a lot of Doctor Who, and
That's really cool.
they put a lot of emphasis sometimes, like the most recent Doctor, he puts a lot of emphasis when he's angry or upset. He actually shows it and puts a little bit more dynamics or something like that, emotion into it. And in that one, it's just like, pow.
Right.
I'm all of a sudden angry. I'm not going to suddenly, gradually get into the anger. I just pop into it.
Right, yeah. Was that, no, that was just,
Yeah,
that was,
like, he's already ticked, just emphasize it.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a thoughtful gesture, a hand raise, or none of the above.
Sure.
Anyway, so what I'm trying to get across, I think you guys are getting, which is that in a play such as Hamlet, which is 4+ hours long and just an insane read, you've got these two characters that have one scene really that you just watched, and then they enter a couple other times, and they're frequently cut out of the play entirely. Not entirely, but most of their lines end up getting cut. And yet, we find that if we just take 20 minutes to think about just a couple right off the top of our heads, interpretations for who they are and what they're doing, Hamlet itself as a play, as a story, changes significantly. And that is a really, really essential thing to understand when you are interpreting dramatic text. The other thing I just want to make sure that I've emphasized is that not only is there no right or wrong way to interpret a scene such as this, as you guys have very clearly understood, but also I think it's best from a drama student's perspective, which you're not, but if you were, to find the most personal interpretation. And I just want to point out to you guys, I think that's sort of naturally what happened. I mean, obviously with the analogy, with the weird analogy, or Doctor Who, this is the stuff that comes to us when we read great texts. And it's from that place that we begin to interpret and begin to develop our own understanding of what a play means, of what a story is, what it means to us. And if we're directors, then we go ahead and we use that as our place that we go from. Any questions before I finish up today's lesson? No?
No.
It's all 100% clear.
Except for, you know, like some of the weird incestual things that
I'll let your English teacher
Yeah.
deal with that stuff.
Slow down.
Let's just say it probably wasn't as weird back then as it is now. You guys, thank you so much. This has been just terrific.